Namaste. Jai Johar, very good morning to all. A promise is a promise. Time to take action to end violence against women. It's this year's UN theme for International Women Year. It is to observe this day that this workshop is organized. But what is International Women's Day? And why is it celebrated on 8th of March? Mythology tells us the gods have lost the war. Mahishasura, he was more powerful. They went to Brahma. He was helpless. So let's go to Vishnu. They go to Bilaspur. And Vishnu tells them, you are not united. Put all your energies, put all your powers together with Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh pitching in. And that's how Ma Durga was born. She is described to have hundreds of hands, with each hand a different weapon. With that, she slew Mahishasura. Ma Durga is embodiment of all power, all Shakti, divine energy. She is empowered. But are today's Durga, today's mother, today's women empowered? Sadly, the answer is no, N-O, no. They have to be empowered. And society also has to understand it. It is this particular need that society should understand it that International Women Year came to be observed. If you look into that 18th century till what I say, 1819, till 1990, some of the counties in Europe did not give right to vote to women. Women have no right to vote till 1990. And from middle of the 19th century, the women started fighting over for their rights. So for the first time, the Socialist Party of America, they organized a Women's Day on last Sunday of February 1909. It was basically to get a right of franchise for women. Next year, they held this conference in Copenhagen and it became International Women's Day. Since then, it was being celebrated on last Sunday of February, not on 8th March. Then came 1917. Now that's a very important year historically. Some of you are students of history will remember that. On an International Women's Day, Russian and clothing, and they went on a protest, a strike on that day. This strike was historic. It led to French Revolution in Russia. Tsar had to abdicate his power. Interim government came, and the first thing it did is to give a right to vote to women. Now Russians, they were following Julian calendar. Rest of the world was following Gregorian. We are following Gregorian calendar at present. Now Gregorian calendar is slightly ahead of Julian calendar. Last Sunday of February 1917 was on 23rd of February. Rest of the day, it was 8th of March. Since the strike was historic, it's kind of a symbolism, victory for women, that world over it came to be celebrated on 8th of March and not on the last Sunday of February. 1975 was International Year of Women, and United Nations decided to observe it 8th of March as International Women Day. In 1977, General Assembly passed a resolution that every member state should observe one day for women empowerment, international peace, according to their national and historical tradition. However, to best of my information, entire world celebrates it on 8th of March. Well, we also celebrated Dashera. That's a Durga Puja. That's for us, that's a Women Empowerment Day, not 8th of March. But that's another question. This year is a very important year for many reasons. About 200 years being celebrated as 200 year of publication of one of the classic novel written by Jane Austen, known as Pride and Prejudice. The novel was written 200 years ago, 1813, still the most popular novel. It sold more than 20 million copies, translated into every language in the world. There have been numerous dramatic adaptations, numerous films. There have been, if you remember that, some of you might remember, who has been fond of TVs, Trishna, 1985, there's a TV serial, was based on it. There is a Bollywood adaptation to it, known as Bride and Prejudice. That's an English one, but of course it has a dialogue in Hindi and Punjabi too. But why am I talking about Pride and Prejudice? You know, judges love sermonizing. That's a favorite pastime of every judge is, oh, sermonizing. Well, but not every time they are irrelevant. Bear with me, I'll connect it to today's topic. Bear with me, I'll connect it up, it's not irrelevant. The story in the novel revolves around Mr. Bennet and his family. Now, Mr. Bennet has a very a respectable income from the state, he's living comfortably. He is the kind of a bright, intelligent, witty, but, book-loving person. His wife is slightly boring, lacking social grace, and they have no love-lost marriage. And at one place, Mr. Bennet says, one should never marry for beauty. They have 5 daughters, and Mrs. Bennet is all the time worried about the marriage of their daughters. Now, there was a peculiarity of English law at the time known as entailment. Now, after death of Mr. Bennet, his property could not be inherited by his widow, not by his daughters, but his nearest male heir, Mr. Collins, his nephew. Mr. Collins proposes to his second daughter, Elizabeth. Elizabeth is a witty, intelligent, book-loving, gone on a father, and father's favorite too. Well, she refuses. She's a protagonist of the novel, and the entire novel unfolds through her eyes, her point of view. She talks about women education, talks about life of women in society, marriage of women in society, and basically she's talking about the beginning of the 19th century, but that in 200 years, the women's position is the same. That's the reason why the novel is still one of the most popular novels. And as back as in 1909, a movie out of this, Pride and Prejudice. If you haven't seen it, some of the students, please see it. It's one of a very sweet romantic movie. The reason I brought this novel up today is because of this law of entailment. Fee-tail of entailment was a peculiarity of English law by which a state could neither be sold, nor transferred, nor willed. Person is the owner, he has to keep it. And after his death, it could only go to the male heir, not the female. Women never had any right. During 18th and 19th century, in England, there was another doctrine known as doctrine of coverture. Now, this doctrine was used by another very great writer whose 200th century we celebrated last year, Charles Dickens. And he used it very well in one of his novels, Oliver Twist. And that gave us one of the most famous court in law, which every judge in an English-speaking world has used as one in his lifetime in one of his judgments. The story is about, Dickens wrote about public accountability of public institutions, and he was talking about the children home. Oliver Twist was an orphan, and his mother's trinket is a small jewelry actually, was stolen by the owner of that workhouse, Mrs. Bumble, And the Mr. Bumble was initially a worker there. He marries the owner of that particular workhouse, Mrs. Bumble, who was a very dominating. And Mr. Bumble was all the time, that kind of thing, you know. And Mrs. Bumble dominating, and she has stolen it. And when it was found out, so they say, he was produced and he says, the coverture means, actually, let me explain you what coverture means, because it's very difficult to understand what coverture means because nobody can conceive of it. In England, this legal doctrine meant that a married woman cannot have any rights. She could not own any property. She could not enter into document. Even if she was earning, she had no right to earn a salary. The salary was with her husband. And also, for certain criminal acts, she was not responsible because she was supposed to be under the control, dictate of her husband, and law used to presume that she has done that criminal act on the dictate of her husband. So when she was done, so I'll just use the word, he was asked, and Mr. Bumble, you know, he looks at it very sheepishly and sees his wife is not there. He says, oh, Mrs. Bumble has taken the tricklet. I'm not responsible at all. She has stolen the property. He says, no, but the law supposes that your wife acts under your direction. And this is what Mr. Bumble answers, which has become the most famous quote. If the law supposes that, said Mr. Bumble, squeezing his hat emphatically in both hands, the law is an ass, an idiot. That's the favorite quote of all judges when they want to say some kind of a argument to be absurd, some kind of interpretation of law to be absurd. They say law is an ass. If you say that law means this, then the law is an ass, an idiot. I brought these two doctrines up because this is how the mind of the English judge, British judge, was fashioned. And this had a devastating effect on Durgas. Under the Mitakshara law, see, the Bengal was governed by Daibhag. Rest of the country was governed by Mitakshara. Under Mitakshara, women had full rights. She never had limited rights. Now, 17th, 18th, 19th century is the time when the British judges were actually consolidating their strengths. All courts were managed by them. And when they started interpreting Mitakshara, having no knowledge of Sanskrit, their mind was warped with a limited or no rights for the woman. They could not imagine that India, a native, a useless country, women have so much of right. How can she have so much of right in India when in England they don't have it? Widow state, women's limited state, is a gift of the courts. I mean, I take that word back because courts is not a correct word. Of gift of British judges to Indian Durgas, Indian women. And England abolished it 1925 in Law Property Act. We took 50 years more. That's 1956, we enacted Hindu Succession Act. That's the time it was abolished. And that is the role of the court, the role of law. That's how the law undid what the role had done. I see some of the students here, bright ones, I'm sure of that. I would be very happy if someone does a small kind of research project. Entailment, coverture, and rights of women under Mitakshara. Laws are important. Its role is important. But don't be under misconception that the law can bring about women empowerment. That's why the role of the lawyers and the courts become important. The women empowerment will be brought about by actually change of her status in the society. And the first thing to change in the status of society is is to change the mental setup of society. How will it come out? Are we ready? Are we mentally ready? Let me ask you a question. Listen to me very carefully. Wow. A father and a son were going in the car. They meet with an accident. The father dies on the spot. The son is seriously injured. He's taken to the hospital. The surgeon says, "Huh? I can't operate. He's my son. Please take him to some other surgeon." How is it possible? The father, wait, keep it to yourself. After tea, we have a lot of time for discussion. We'll be able to. Now, if you're able to get the answer, good enough. You are mentally attuned. But if you can't get the answer, don't despair. Don't worry. A lot has already been done to change the mental setup of society, though a lot is still required to be done. It was 50 years ago, Robert Kennedy once said, "Some people see things as they are." I say, "Oh, why? Why? I dreams about things that they never were." I said, "Why not? It can be done." So if we think about it, if we talk about women empowerment, if we dream about women empowerment, there's no reason why we will not achieve the century. And what were those dreams that we have had? What role did law, lawyers, and court plays in those dreams? What kind of dreams that they should have in future is this workshop about? And imagine, who can tell us better than Sister Mishra, who herself is empowered. She is a judge of a Supreme Court, and it's not an easy achievement. I'm sure that many of us do not give women the credit that they deserve in the society. We often smile at them, "Oh, you got a stay order because, that's we keep." We never give them so much of credit that they really deserve. And of course, Justice Dattu, who of this Chhattisgarh, it is his Chhattisgarh, he was Chief Justice here, and he's a judge of the Supreme Court. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to introduce the topic.